Hi, this is David Gornoski, host of A Neighbor's Choice and Things Hidden podcast, as well as some of our other programs like Science and You with our chief science advisor, Dr. Yu, and our seed oil survival series that we continue to have great fun unpacking the truth of nutrition. I wanted to give you a quick little message saying we appreciate all the support that we get from our uh, monthly contributors and our one-time donation supporters. And we'd encourage all of you to go to our website, a neighborschoice.com, click on contribute, and make a monthly pledge today, whether it's $1, $5, 15, 20, 50, whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. Just be a part of building this new media project that we've developed to empower and inform, to inspire, to kickstart a scientific renaissance, an anthropological breakthrough and reformation in the church. All these things are possible with your support right now. So make that commitment today and help us keep doing the productions that we have. Thank you. Today we have a returning guest, someone who is not afraid to mix it up with some controversial opinions on some of the outlets out there like Human Events and Substack. We have with us Raw Egg Nationalist. How you doing, sir?
It's great to be back with you, Dave. It's always a pleasure to talk.
Have you been slonking some eggs today? That's kind of your thing, right? Is that how you start every day, or did you miss out today?
No, I haven't missed a single day as far as I can know, as far as I can remember. Even when I've been ill, even when I had the coronavirus, I was still slonking. And yeah, that is how I start the day. It's a very, very good way to start the day, and it's how I end the day as well.
Okay, very good. That's your nightcap, huh?
Uh-huh. Yep.
Very good. So let's dive into some of the heavy topics going on right now. You touched on something in a Substack recently that I thought was kind of it's an interesting phenomenon to try to unpack why it's happening, and what does it mean. In your Substack, Raw Egg Nationalist.substack.com, your story out on November 24th, a few observations about the situation in Ireland. In case you didn't know, this is not how we're supposed to respond. And it's got a picture of McGregor. Can you set people up, kind of the lay of the land of this story for those who are not familiar with what happened in Ireland and what's going on?
Yeah, of course. So a few days ago, about 5 days ago, then a migrant or a man of non-Irish origin. I think he turned out to be Algerian. He was an Algerian man who had been living in Ireland for 20 years on benefits, had never had a job, had been on social welfare the whole time. He went into a school in Dublin and stabbed 5 people, including 3 children. And I think one of the children may have died. I'm not sure, but they were all hospitalized. They were stabbed. The man was subdued and arrested. But after that, then there was a huge uproar, really, among native Irish about what had just happened, quite understandably. And there were riots in Dublin. People were really, really angry. And I used the picture of Conor McGregor because Conor McGregor was commenting really very, very angrily about the situation on Twitter. He was really going hard, um, uh, especially in response to there was a statement that was made by the Irish Premier Leo Varadkar, and he said, basically what they did was they focused on the violence, the far right violence, the rioting after the event, the media, politicians, rather than the actual events, the stabbing by a migrant of Irish children that had caused it. And it's this familiar narrative that we see, where some outrage takes place as a result of our leaders appalling leadership and their desire to import infinity migrants and change the demographics, totally upend the demographics of Western nations. Some outrage happens. People respond after enormous provocation, years and years, decades of provocation. And that's the case in Ireland. They've been dealing with the massive social and economic effects of mass migration now for some years, laboring under it, not being able really to say anything. And then it all comes to a head and people vent their feelings and their understandable frustrations. And what happens? They get labeled far right, and the event that caused the outpouring of emotion is swept away. And instead, what we get is we get politicians and the media calling for a crackdown. And that's exactly what's happening now in Ireland. They're bringing in really draconian hate speech laws to limit freedom of expression. I think you can actually, they're suggesting that you might be able to go to prison for up to a year simply for possession of an offensive meme on your computer now. So it's a complicated situation, but it basically boils down to the extreme sort of an upsurge of feeling about the effects of decades of mass immigration.
Yeah, it seems like everything's building to this pressure cooker environment is going to come to something, and it's disturbing to think of what it could look like with the chaos if there's not something that can um, solve some of these long-standing injuries that multiple parties seem to be having in regards to the um, the long-standing policies of political correctness and censorship and disrespect to different people's identities and so forth. And it's kind of, I hate that word. They use it for everything now, but they got a gaslighting that they really truly do. It's always a tell. The words that are the most overused and misused are always the ones hiding in plain sight that reveal the most about what the establishment's up to, isn't it? It's funny how that works.
Yes, I think you're very right about that. And so what I say in this Substack piece is I say, what we're seeing again is we're seeing the emergence of a script, basically, a social script that is forced upon us or thrust upon us by our rulers, where we're supposed to respond to tragedies, and especially to tragedies that are caused by immigrants, that are the effect of, or that are an effect of mass immigration. We're supposed to respond in a particular way. We're not supposed to get angry. We're not supposed to protest. We're not even allowed to notice what is going on. What we have to do is hold hands and renounce hate and any kind of desire for retribution. And we have to come together. Maybe we'll stage a concert. Maybe we'll have we'll sing a platitudinous pop song while we all join hands. And that's exactly what we see time and time again. Whether we're talking about something like the Bataclan massacre in France, that terrible, terrible massacre that killed 130 people in Paris, series of attacks on a single night, the London Bridge attacks, the Manchester Arena bombing. I mean, the Manchester Arena bombing, then after the event, there was this slogan that was sort of put forward by the authorities: "Don't look back in anger," and everybody was singing the Oasis song "Don't Look Back in Anger," and that was supposed to be this sort of rallying call for everyone to unify and sort of rally round with love but it actually what we see again and again is that this script, and I think it is a script, it distracts our focus from the causes of massacres like the Bataclan massacre, the London Bridge attacks, the Manchester Arena bombing, all these kinds of things. We stop talking about the failures of our leaders, the deliberate policies that our leaders have instituted over decades and decades that have made our nations poorer, less safe, less harmonious, worse places to live. And I mean, I talk about some. So the piece on Substack actually is linked then to another piece that I've written for Human Events, which is out today or should be out today, where I talk in depth about this script and where it comes from and the kind of purposes that it serves. But there was a very, 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 very interesting article that came out on the Middle East Eye a few years ago, I think it might have been sort of 2019 that it came out, but it revealed details of a form of government planning in the UK called controlled spontaneity. Elon Musk, actually, interestingly, somebody brought it to Elon Musk's attention not that long ago on Twitter, and he responded with a series of exclamation marks, but which is how he seems to reply to respond to a lot of things these days. But the basic idea behind this form of government planning, controlled spontaneity, is that the government preemptively has all of these plans so that it can shape and direct public opinion and outpourings of emotion in ways that prevent disorder from happening when an atrocity like a terrorist attack happens. And so the people at Middle East Eye spoke to all sorts of government insiders and people in the intelligence services in Britain, and they found out that basically the government does things like it pre-selects hashtags and images that it wants to circulate on social media. It encourages members of victims' families to make public statements disavowing hatred. And they also actually even go so far as to stage apparently unprompted gestures of love and support, that's a quotation, at the site of the incident. So people handing out flowers and posters.
Is this the CRS you're talking about? You're talking about CRS?
No, that's slightly different. So that's slightly different, but it's kind of the same. But this controlled spontaneity thing is a government initiative in the UK. It was a secret initiative, but then it was revealed. And when you actually think about that, then it looks, that kind of model of trying to redirect public opinion and public emotion, outpourings of emotion in particular ways to nullify them, if you will, to prevent them from causing problems for government. When you actually start looking around, you see that absolutely everywhere across the Western world now. Yeah. And so in the human events piece as well, then I talk about this. The Department of Justice in the US has this bureau called the Community Relations Service, and it styles itself as America's peacemaker. Yeah. And basically what they do is they go, when there's a let's say like a racially charged case, a racially charged murder, then they get involved, and usually it seems when the victim is white and the perpetrator is a different race, then what they seem to do is they seem to tell the family of the white victim to make a public statement saying, you know, we absolutely don't believe that race was a factor involved in this murder. You know, this isn't about race or racism. This was just a senseless killing, something like that. And we want everybody, you know, not to get angry about this. You know, we need to come together. We need to unify the community rather than sow further division. Blah blah blah. So that goes on the one hand, and then the CRS seems to intervene with the Justice Service to actually prevent the perpetrator from getting a serious sentence. So, for instance, in 2018, a chap called Donald Giusti was hit in the head with a rock and then kicked to death by some Somali immigrants in a park in Maine. And the CRS intervened in that case. And they actually talk about it on their website. It's listed as a kind of key case study of the work that they do. They intervened in the case, and of course, we saw the family of Donald Giusti, his brother, I think, and his sister come out and say, you know, this wasn't a racial killing. There was no racial motive. We need to come together and unify the community. And then the man who was identified as the killer, I mean, there was a mob, I think, of people who kicked him to death, but the man who was identified as the primary assailant, if you will, was able to plead no contest to a lesser charge of criminal negligence. And then he was sentenced to 9 months in prison. And so what actually happened was a brutal racial killing was essentially made to disappear. And in many respects, I think that looks quite a lot like the way that controlled spontaneity works in the UK. And actually, you just start to see it everywhere. You see again and again in cases where, you know, a white person is murdered by a black person or black people or Hispanics or whoever. Time and time again in situations like that now, you see that the almost the first thing that the family do in response is speak at a press conference and say race had nothing to do with this killing. It just happens again and again. So it happened recently with this poor teenager, Jonathan Lewis. I don't know, you may have seen the awful video on Twitter. He was a 17-year-old boy and he was beaten to death in an alleyway behind his school by a mob of black schoolmates, by 10 or more of his schoolmates. The first thing his father does is his father sets up a sort of GoFundMe page, and the message on the page is, this is a humanity thing, beloved people of the United States, not a race thing. I mean, it seems strange to me that that would be one of the first things that you would say. And then you also have the case of Andy Probst back in September. You may remember he was a former policeman. He was cycling along, I think, in Las Vegas or in Nevada, and two teens, a black teen and a Hispanic teen, on a joyride, ran him off his bike and killed him. And they filmed it on a phone, and they're laughing and joking about it.
Yeah.
And again, what happens? There's a press conference when they're apprehended by the police, and his daughter, Andy Probst's daughter, the victim's daughter, says the following: "We believe that Andy's murder is a direct result of society's decayed family values and the strong effects that social media has on our youth. We as a family in no way feel that Andy's murder was based on race or profession and was a random act of violence. We ask you to not politicize or use Andy's murder to fuel political agendas or to create culture wars." It's just quite striking that this just happens again and again and again. And I mean, you could say, well, oh, look, these people are, grief does terrible things. Grief makes people think. Grief makes people's thinking confused, and they're obviously grieving, and so maybe they just want to be left alone. But it happens again and again and again. And so I think really what it is it's a script, and I think that it serves particular purposes that we can talk about.
Do you have any evidence before we get into that purpose? Do you have any evidence that the CRS are involved, this group of the Department of Justice is involved in any of those cases you just mentioned, or do you have any evidence of that?
Yes, yeah. Well, it was definitely involved in the case of Donald Giusti, the chap who was hit on the head with a rock and beaten to death by the Somali migrants, because they talk about it on their website. They say what they did.
Uh-huh.
So it's actually listed.
What's their
on
process?
Their website.
Do they reveal what it is? They just come in with a PowerPoint or something?
They say so. They have. I mean, on the website, then it's all this kind of thick bureaucratic slop kind of language, where they say, as soon as a relevant conflict arises, we provide facilitated dialogue, mediation, training, and consultation to help communities come together, develop solutions to the conflict, and enhance their capacity to independently prevent and resolve future conflict. I mean, but what it looks like it amounts to when you look at a case like that and you compare it to others that look familiar is that actually the CRS tells the family of the victim, look, don't say that race was involved, and then they help the killer to get off with a light sentence.
Yeah. It's interesting that there's a lot there. First of all, I don't know, a couple of things that come to mind. First, from a state's perspective, the idea of having managed spontaneity sounds exactly like what a state would want to develop, right? I mean,
exactly.
That's their entire. I mean, especially if a state wants to create the perception of public buy-in and public participation and public power over the things that it does, you're going to have to learn the art of managed spontaneity to get anything done. Especially with the media, digital, decentralized, saturation environment that we're in.
Mm.
So from their perspective, I guess what's the problem? You know, I mean, from the state's perspective, and these oligarchs that benefit from the status quo of where
Yeah.
we're at, where is there a problem with what they're doing? So, for example, what you're highlighting, it sounds like in Europe and Ireland is states saying, hey, you know, look, to their majority white populations, hey, behave yourselves. Don't you be blaming these people because of their race. That's it. You know, a lot of this is half-baked Christian language they're borrowing and using intentionally because these populations are most saturated with Christian tradition in their culture, whether it's Ireland or America or whatever. So they're using this kind of language and ethos that we're saturated in, and they're leaning into it in a kind of half-baked selective way for cynical purposes. But they're basically saying, like, look, you're going to behave yourself. You're not going to go crazy. You're not going to get tribal here on me. And they're kind of, what it sounds like they're doing is they're trying to manage a majority shift. You know, like, okay, the majority of the population are these native folks that we've had, and now they're going to be supplanted by a majority of a coalition of immigrants and so forth. And so we need to manage that transition in a very safe way so that as they diminish, they kind of voluntarily can be coaxed into going along to it. Controlled spontaneity,
Yes.
you know, controlled spontaneity of going along with it so that we don't have anybody popping off and then creating reciprocal violence between the communities. So from a state's perspective, what's wrong with what they're doing?
Yeah, no, I mean, I actually think, I mean, thinking about it, you know, it's not too different from, say, Noam Chomsky's idea of manufacturing consent.
Yeah.
I think it's a method of manufacturing consent for, as you suggest, the policy basically of demographic replacement, and it's a way of keeping, yeah, it's a way of keeping a lid on public outrage, preventing people
Yeah.
from, not only preventing people from resisting, but actually preventing people from even knowing really what's going
Yeah.
on.
You
So,
got you got an employee, right? They've been with you a long time. You want to get rid of them and replace them with another employee, right? A new employee.
yeah,
Sometimes there's a lot of heated emotions, and there's ways that companies find the need to, you know what I mean, manage their exit from the company
yes,
where their card is
exactly.
removed. And that's exactly what I think is happening here from their managerial perspective. They're trying to create psychological methods and techniques to music and using celebrities and all these folks that have skin in the game with the oligarchic interests of consumerism and debt and all these things, entertainment and all these little avatars are useful for, to say, hey, you know, all hands on deck. These are good values that we need to hold up. Forgiveness, you know, don't look back in anger. Who can disagree with that on the highest aspirations of the Christian worldview?
Yeah.
That we're all haunted by, whether we're atheists or not. We're still kind of saturated in that fishbowl, that the water of our fishbowl being Christianity. So if that's what I'm just looking from their realpolitik perspective, they're just trying to manage this kind of transition. What's wrong with that from a state's perspective?
Yeah, no, yeah, nothing. No, I mean it's totally understandable. It makes sense. I mean,
Yeah,
if that is what you are, if that is what you are trying to do, you've pursued policies of demographic replacement for decades, which is exactly what has happened throughout the West. I mean, it's, you know, it's been going on wholesale in the UK since at least 1997. That was the you know, when Tony Blair's new Labour government came into power. So yeah, so we're talking about, yeah, about governments basically, yes, doing what is in their interests, given that their interest does seem to be to replace the native populations of their countries with populations that they can, for whatever reason, that they feel that they can manage better.
yeah. What do you think is the you know, why does it have this language, and why is it, you know, I mean, I have my overarching, you know, as you may know from some of my stuff, I have kind of an overarching thesis that's animating some of my observations about current events, of kind of the Christ hauntedness of what we see in our society for good or ill, you know, however we use that hauntedness. What do you see as the kind of telos? What is this supposed to go? I mean, I think it's just a transition of transitioning, kind of employees in an organization, and yet, is there something more here? Is there, in terms of its direction? Using what I
I
mean is
don't
saying,
know.
what I'm saying by like cracking
Yeah,
down so much on what you can
yeah.
say and memes and all this. Is it just kind of a controlling like creating a passive kind of smooth transition as demographics change, or is there something else involved in this process?
I think it's difficult to know. I mean, it's very easy to get conspiratorial about it, but
Yeah,
I think that, and that's a danger, because then you end up going off down, all sorts of dark passageways,
yeah,
and actually end up completely sort of getting quite confused. But I mean, I think it's undeniable that demographic replacement is taking place and has been taking place and is going to continue taking place unless there is some radical shift in politics in the West. So I mean, whether the telos is just demographic replacement or not, I don't know. But it's bad enough if it is just demographic replacement. But I think that you're right about the Christ hauntedness stuff that you talk about is very, very interesting, and it is interesting the language that is used to justify this.
yeah. America's peacemaker. Blessed are the
Yeah,
peacemakers. Don't look
yeah,
back in anger. Forgive your enemies. 99. 70 times 7. This is
mm,
all straight from the gospel hymn book. So, so the question is, this is the thing in terms of what do we do about it is the big question, right?
yes,
Observing something is not right here, but the question is, what parts of it are not right? Um, is it truly the right position for folks who are not on board with the establishment, not on board with political correctness, to take a stance against a family, saying, you know what, this isn't about a race, this is about human evil or something. I mean, they're not saying it quite like that, but and in fact, that sounds like Solzhenitsyn. The line between evil runs
mm,
through the heart of every man, not through, this person versus that person. So in some sense, and again, he was a Christ haunted society himself, but he was speaking about the universality of evil. So I
yeah,
understand what you're pointing out, and what others are pointing out is this kind of uh, this unfair or picking and choosing application of Christian standards, right? Which is
mm,
obviously cynical and not
mm,
consistent, right? It's like targeted
yeah,
towards one group, like you behave in this
yeah,
Christian standard, and then other people are told, and other tradition, other cultures or whatever are told, nah, you don't have to go along quite like that. Like
mm,
there's the visceral reality that there's some kind of scapegoat class being created here,
yes.
you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think so. What I say in the human events piece is, you know, maybe it would be a little bit unkind to say to the families, look, what if we were talking about not a white victim but a black victim? Would race be an issue then? And of course it would, wouldn't it? It would instantly be considered.
Right.
It would instantly be considered the animating motive. If
You mean
if Jonathan,
if you switched out the
yeah, so
races in terms of who
if
was killing who?
yeah, so
Yeah,
like in the case of Jonathan Lewis, for instance, this 17-year-old white boy.
yeah,
Imagine if the internet was awash with a video of 10 white boys beating a black boy to death in an alleyway. I
yeah,
mean, can you imagine? Can
yeah.
you imagine? I mean, it would be George Floyd times 10. Um uh and that is the truth. I mean, you just, I think that question really is sufficient. What if the tables were turned? If the races were swapped around?
But
Then
why do you think?
actually you've got your answer.
Yeah, but why do you think that? And a lot of people have noticed that in different ways, and it is certainly becoming more, like you said, it seems like a more like controlled spontaneity kind of phenomenon you see. Um, but why do you think that double standard exists? Like what's why is there this like Christian style, standard that's seemingly applied to one demographic, and then other demographics are not given that same standard of human empathy for the other outside of, their, you know what I mean? Like, why is that double standard there?
Well, I think what's fundamentally going on is actually that we're dealing with. I mean, people like Jordan Peterson talk about this, about the fact that fundamentally what we're seeing an oppressor oppressed,
Right.
a sort of narrative. There are the oppressors and the oppressed, and victimizers and victims, and basically white people have been cast as the victimizers as a
Right.
class. So, I mean, you talk about scapegoat class. That's really what it is, So we have this sense that actually simply to belong, simply to be white means that you are, in some sense, a victimizer.
Yeah.
Not only in the present day, but also sort of you're responsible for historical victimization as well. And so actually you bear the weight of the sin of your people,
Right.
Regardless of what you've done. And
like collective guilt.
Then, it is collective guilt. And Jordan Peterson, I think, is very right that that's an incredibly dangerous idea, and that it has resulted in the most terrible inhumanity and genocide, murder, mass murder. But then, of course, on the other side, you have then an entire class of, or classes of people who are all collectively victims, and so actually they're held to a totally different standard.
Right.
Almost any form of unpleasantness, of retribution in any kind is licensed because they are victims, and they have an inherent sort of moral value.
Yeah. And there's
simply
and let's point out let's point out something here. They use the word love, but the animus behind the establishment treating certain demographics as if they're incapable of having the same standard applied to them is the most, of course, disrespectful, patronizing, dehumanizing, way you could view a human. Like, you're not capable of the same standards of these people, so we're going to like dumb society's rules down for some people and not for others, which is not going to end up in anything positive or good for anybody in the long term. So
no, I mean these you could almost say that these groups are actually pets. Like,
right. Like sacred. I was
minorities.
thinking about sacred cows, and I was like, yeah, some people keep these little zebus from India, which were the original sacred cows, literally as pets in America. And that's exactly how the establishment left views minorities. These are pets.
And particular minorities. And it's I mean, they deploy them as and when they are useful politically. And there's all sorts of revelations coming out now, just today, I think, about some really strange, funny business that went on with George Floyd's autopsy with the FBI. I don't know if you've seen this yet.
I didn't see it. That came out today. What did it say?
Basically, that the FBI met with the coroner.
Oh, God.
Before he announced his verdict about George Floyd's death, and the suggestion is that they told him, that it had to be murder, basically.
Wow. Yeah, talk about meddling. There you go again with the science thing, right? Meddling with the science to create a political science outcome. My God, have mercy. But imagine if society, if the elites and establishment, when George Floyd was killed by this guy, if they came out and said, this is not about race. The president said, this is, if they all came out in one force and said, this is not about race, this is not about white things, this is called, human frailty, human failures in the moment, whatever, just something more universal to the individual, to the human person. That would be more in keeping with the spirit of America and the spirit of Christianity, which deals with human persons, not collective tribes at its heart. That would be that would be actually a good faith application of these Christian tropes and language that that you've pointed out are being selectively used in cynical, violent ways by the establishment in Europe and America. And that's the problem, right? Is like, if there was a universal call to treat each other as individuals, right, across the board for every group, right, that would create, in my opinion, it would create some healing effect. I know Jordan Peterson has talked about that as something that people should aspire to. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, it would certainly be a start, and I think it would certainly society would certainly benefit from it, because along our current trajectory with the rhetoric and the propaganda and the ideology that that we're currently being served, then we're heading in a very, very dark direction, and it's and obviously it's only going to be made worse by demographic change as well, of course. So it's not just it's a self-fulfilling cycle, if you will, where you have this rhetoric and ideology that is justifying demographic change, and then further demographic change strengthens it. It strengthens the, it is a watershed. It will be a watershed when America becomes a minority white nation, and that's going to happen very soon. And I think that what you will see is you'll see and hear people this rhetoric will really take on an even more intense and even nastier aspect, I think, because the power of white people will have been fundamentally of white Europeans will have been fundamentally diminished in America. Yeah.
But to me, the thing that's paradoxical seemingly about this is that the more people identified as white try to take on a conscious racial tribalism, the more it's going to contribute to the breakdown of trust, order, and merit in society on all sides, right? It's going to reciprocate a similar doubling down on tribal identity by racial lines for other groups that may have it, and it's going to double it down on that side, and it'll double back down on the other side. And then you get into this entrenched kind of, balkanized, tribalized world, like everything that the ancient world was, that, America at its best was a movement away from, like the idea of a society that retrenches back to racial identity as a tribal priority. Okay, I'm not saying that the color blindness, people have criticized that for a lot. I'm not talking. I think it's foolish for people to say that the only choices when faced with these Orwellian things is like some kind of goofy, fake veneer of color blindness in terms of what that's supposed to mean versus, racial tribalism as the priority. I think there's something else possibly. And where it's like you're aware of race and honest about it, and concerns and all the different, prejudices that different groups have about others, and the out groups can just be brought on the table in an honest dialogue, right? In a communal conversation, and hash differences out in a more jovial, more lighthearted way. But they don't, but I think this goes to something that, my point is that I think this goes to something underlying where we're at in society, that Peter Thiel has mentioned, that we're talking about woke and all this stuff. Society's elites push that because it's a cover, a fig leaf for the fact that everything is stagnant in the world of atoms. There's no real growth in wages. There's no real growth in people's ability to afford houses and cars without debt, and build and innovate and create new things that are like astounding and create hope. No cures for cancer that are inexpensive, no energy too cheap to meter. None of this stuff is on people's map by and large as a society in Europe or America. And because of that, you're left to nothing but zero-sum battles based on tribalism. And I don't think that's a good place to go. And I think the right is in very grave danger of taking that bait by the establishment. I think that's a trap.
Yeah, I mean, I do think you're right. I mean, I think first of all, there's of course the fact that actually white consciousness doesn't seem to come very easily anyway to people in the US. Most people, I actually think that, to most white people in the US, I mean, actually, it's, you read these surveys about sort of racial consciousness that are done, and affiliation and all that kind of stuff, and it's, white people in America don't primarily think of themselves as white. And so actually, I mean, whether or not you could get them to, even if you wanted to, I think is an issue in and of itself. I mean, obviously, I think you are going to see, and you are seeing at the moment, an increase in a sort of white self-consciousness, but whether that could ever be on a large scale, an animating sort of political affiliation, I don't know. I mean, balkanization, yes, is dangerous, and we've seen it's called balkanization for a reason, because it's what happened in the Balkans, and lots of nasty stuff came out of it. Lots of killing and rape, and all sorts of
Yeah.
regressive stuff that really wasn't nice. So yes, I mean, it is a serious danger. But I mean, I think that fundamentally what has to happen is the mass migration has to come to an end.
Yeah.
I think until the mass migration comes to an end, and until, the massive numbers of illegal immigrants in the US are, well, deported, then
Yeah.
I don't think you can sit down and have an honest conversation, on the level of the kind that you're suggesting, which I think would be a good idea. I don't think you can have that until the finger that is that is tipping the scale is taken off the scale, and that finger is mass immigration. It's mass immigration that is driving so many problems. I mean, there was a news thing that came out today about the cost of housing, and looking after illegal migrants in the US, and I think it was $451 billion a year. They were saying was
Yeah.
an estimate of the cost. I mean, you know, and they were saying that Trump couldn't build a border wall because it cost 5 billion or however much. I mean, you know, illegal migration is sapping the nation of its ability to address all sorts of fundamental problems. And so I think that absolutely, then something needs to be done about illegal migration, and deporting illegal migrants and preventing them from coming, before there can be any kind of sort of sensible reckoning about America's future.
And I think, and this is one of the reasons why I talk about it so much in my writings from an anthropological perspective, but I think until Americans can have an honest conversation about how much of what is the best about America is not some secret sauce that we can't figure out, it's actually just the Christianity and its ethics and its aesthetics, inspiring some of these things coming into law and custom. These are things like having a high trust society doesn't drop down from the sky. It just
No,
doesn't. And it's not, you can't quarantine it into a race, because you can always look at observations of that cut across that kind of theory. But you do seem to see that things like presumption of innocence, the idea of having a fair and impartial jury, the idea of having freedom to assemble, the idea of sharing a meme without being attacked like people are being now, the idea of having freedom of religion, the idea of having habeas corpus, all these different foundational things that we take for granted, the idea of having private property and private contract that is somewhat respected by courts. All of these things are not taken for granted, and they get disintegrated the more we devolve into tribalism on every ground. And it's kind of this catch-22 where I think that a lot of folks on the right feel like they need to take on a case of racial tribalism as like a temporary defense mechanism from open borders, and then they want to like discard that once the matter is resolved. But I don't know how that's going to work. You know what I mean? It seems like it might be a trap, because once you get to that point, then you've lost the pot. You've lost the plot of the foundations that made this republic work in a way that was unique beyond other countries that did not have presumption of innocence and still fail to have contract. In America, I don't know how it is where you live, but in America, you can go down the street still in a major city, in a major city actually, and because I've seen it, where a farmer's co-op, because you talk about food, will let you put in your money into a little bucket that's open, unlocked. Put the money in and grab your gallon, your self-serve of raw milk. That didn't happen in a vacuum. And when people retrench back into, what, screw all this, I don't trust anybody's society, I don't trust anybody that don't look like me, I don't, and you go back to that level, all that does is feed that disintegration of trust and then the disintegration of merit. And then you get social retardation on a scale we can't even imagine, where people aren't going to understand how to fix a pipe in a sewage system or anything. And it's a chaos that is absolutely terrifying, and I don't see enough folks on the right taking the Christian part of this. That doesn't mean you have to have the metaphysics of Christianity. Oh, okay, I got to sign up for your faith or your little Trinity or whatever the thing that people are worried about being asked to buy into. But just taking the aesthetics, the ethics of what was built here and why those things lasted, right? And then having the courage to fight for those things and not this mushy stuff of whatever, I think that's important. I think that's essential to rolling this stuff back,
Well, I also think it's important for people to realize that, as you say, about the collapse or the disappearance of a high trust society, that it happens, and it has happened. I mean, if you look at somewhere like South Africa, look at what South Africa's become. I mean, okay, you can talk about apartheid and the ills of the rights and wrongs of apartheid. But South Africa as a nation now is a non-functioning nation. They have rolling blackouts. People are retreating into gated communities to get away from this hell of theft and rape and murder, and that's happened within 30 years. I mean, apartheid ended in 1990 or thereabouts, and in 2023, South Africa is now a non-functioning nation. And so it can happen quickly, and people need to understand that. And yes, I think you're right. I mean, it is you can't get away from the truth of what made America what it is, or what it was. America was a Christian nation. America was founded as a Christian nation. Puritans fleeing persecution in Europe, in the UK, and in the Low Countries and other places like that.
Right.
I mean, I think that you're not. I don't think that you can revive America by departing from America's roots. Fundamentally, I think you have to get back to the roots, of course,
right.
if you want to if you want to renew America as America. You can renew America as something else, but it won't be America.
Yeah, I think fundamentally the faith that's betrayed by the politically correct establishment is a faith in a pagan order that says, well, in order for society to function, we have to have a scapegoat class. In the past, the government thinks this way. In the past, it was Black people were scapegoated in certain examples. In the past, Chinese railroad workers were scapegoated in a certain social context, or this or that. Well, now we're going to re-engineer society, and whether these things happened organically or were put in motion on purpose by establishment government aligned forces, that whatever the case may be there, the result is that they believe that society needs to function well with a designated scapegoat class that you can kick, that you can punch, that you can demean, that you can harass, that you can kill without consequence. And that is simply a pagan reversal of the Christian aesthetic of the cross that we cannot tolerate. We cannot tolerate a kind of barbaric retrieval of the past, which ultimately will destroy everything in the world. That's going to destroy the whole world, because without Christian cultures being able to be Christian, China and those people won't have anybody to imitate as cultures. You know what I mean? Because they don't yet have the Christian infection deep enough to have the ability to give space for the Nikola Tesla who may be in China right now. Nikola Tesla has to make a deal with establishment to have any chance of having anything in China. And then it's watered down to the point where it's not leading the way. That's why they don't have cold fusion over there. That's why they don't have nuclear fusion. That's why they're not leading the way with all the paper thin wealth that the veneer that they seem to display. They have attributes that are good too. But they're still borrowing and imitating the things that they get from the West. But the West is losing its merit and its drive for the future because it's losing its Christianity, and therefore there's nothing left to imitate in a good way. So if Christian cultures fail in history, there is nothing left for a human civilization to go forward except for this nightmarish technocratic, hellscape that these failed elites children want to try to imagine, which I think is overblown in its ability to even take off the ground. But the whole elephant in the room is the cross of Christ and its effect on our imagination, and the question becomes: can society function without a thriving scapegoat class that we're all allowed to kick, punch, demean, spit on, and there's no reprisal? That's the question. The elites believe, no, you need to have a scapegoat class. So they're trying to, in real time, engineer that new designated scapegoat class and cement its role and make them happy to be that. And they're kicking back saying, I don't want to be that. And then they're saying, well, you're a monster if you don't take the role of the scapegoat, dummy. And it's like a scapegoat. It's like a scapegoat hot potato game. It's like, no, you're the scapegoat. No, I don't want to be it. You do it. It's like, no, but how about we become civilized Christians and stop doing it? Because that's how the best of the things that we enjoy today happened, is that people turned away from mob violence for solutions to problems, and they turned towards, I guess we don't have to burn this witch today because we figured out penicillin helps with this disease that's been hitting our our community. It's the kind of second guessing of collective violence, which is the occasion for civilization forming progress. And we're in danger of losing it completely. We don't understand where it comes from.
Yeah, I do think that the descent into collective shaming and collective scapegoating. I mean, we've seen it. It's happened in the past. It's happened in the recent past, and I think that we're on a very, very dangerous trajectory. The question is, as you say, how do we break this cycle? And I'm not sure. I'm really not sure. But I think that we have to, if we want to preserve and renew the good things that we've already created in the West, and that we're very much in danger of losing.
Well, very good, sir. It's always great to hear your perspective on things, and I want people to check out your various platforms. Where would you want people to go to follow you?
Well, so follow me on Twitter. I am babygravy9 on Twitter. My Substack is raweggnationalist.substack.com. And I have a magazine. It's called Man's World. That's mansworldmag.online. But I mean, Twitter is absolutely the best place to follow me for regular updates. I post all sorts of stuff there. So if you're looking for the latest, then you'll find it there.
Thank you. Very appreciate your time.
It was a pleasure, Dave. Thank you.
Take care.